Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a licensed social worker interviewing social workers, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today, Ms. Bodequia Simon, a licensed social worker, a library social worker, and the founder of Black Girls in Social Work. She's also a certified mental health first aid instructor, social work creative, author, speaker, entrepreneur. Hi, Bodequia. I'm so glad you're
Hi.
here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I know I just gave a little bit of your spiel, but if you
Mhm.
would, could you just introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do, who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Bodequia. I do go by Dequa, so I answer to both. But I am a licensed master social worker in the state of South Carolina. And here I am a library social worker in a rural community here in the States. I am a graduate of the University of South Carolina with my BSW and MSW. And so yeah, I've done a lot of things in social work so far. But my journey is fairly new. I graduated in 2018, so I've done a lot, but I still have a lot left to do. So I'm excited.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I'm also someone who got Bachelor of Social Work straight into Master of Social Work. So feel yeah, related on that journey.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit about how you chose to get into the field of social work. What did that look like?
Yes. So I like to say that I didn't choose social work. Social work kind of chose me. When I was in high school, like everyone else, I feel like I wanted to do a lot of different things. One minute I want to be a doctor, next minute I want to be a nurse. Then I realized I hated blood, so I don't want to do either of those things. But I did have a desire to work in a hospital setting. So I entered into a health careers program at my high school, and I had every intention on going to school for health records administration. And so that was the major I declared on all of my college applications. That was what I was going to do. And so in the health careers program, we had to complete health clinical rotations, pretty much an internship, like a shadowing internship
Mm-hmm.
for our final grade. And they couldn't get me with the records department because of HIPAA. Makes sense. And so my teacher at the time, he was just like, well, we'll get you with the social worker until we can figure out something else. Because I wanted to do the administration side.
Mm-hmm.
So I was placed with a social worker and I fell in love with it. I love the way that the social worker I shadowed, I love the way that she navigated the hospital. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked in a or been in a hospital setting when it comes to social work, but you can go from being on the behavioral health floor to then going on labor and delivery and just navigating so many different things depending on how your case management program is set up at your hospital. But at the hospital we were stationed at, she had all the floors. So I got to watch her go from working with a patient with a behavioral health concern to working with a patient in labor delivery to working with one of the preemie babies
Wow.
that lost, parental rights. So they were just at the hospital alone and with a caseworker. So I got to see her do so many different things in the short amount of time that I was with her. And I was like, wow, I was just mind blown, and I never knew that there was this side of social work because like most people, when I hear of social work, I hear, oh, you want to help people, but no one really explains what that actually looks like. And so I was able to see what that actually could look like because now I know that that's not even the only one way that it looks. So when I saw it, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. I'm working in a hospital. I'm gonna be a social worker. And then when I got into the program, I learned that there was so much more than
Mm.
just hospital when it came to social work. But that was how I initially got into social work, just by chance of being placed with a social worker in high school.
That's awesome. And it's crazy how some of the most life-changing things can happen just by like chance or like you'd never guess it was
Yes,
going to happen. And then it opens a
yes.
whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild to hear about the social work you were with too, and how diverse she was and the different people and the different floors, because that's a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I got my steps in with her for sure. We were just like going back and forth, back and forth. And it was actually interesting to compare that experience to my actual experience as a social worker in a hospital setting, because when I was a medical social worker, I was particularly in the ER. I
Mm,
rarely ever went up to the floors outside of like case management celebrations and things like that.
mhm.
So my job was strictly in the ER, and that was where I always was in that role. And we did psych assessments, and then we did some medical assessments as well, but the ER was my place versus when I was with her, I was seeing everything.
Mhm.
So it's even interesting, like looking back on it today. I never thought about it till just now of how the difference
Yeah.
was for me versus her. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned that you went to University of South Carolina. What are
Yeah.
some things you remember about like your program, both bachelor level or master level? Like what's something
Mhm.
you loved about learning social work?
What I loved about it, so a lot of things were happening when I was in my social work program. The election was happening.
Mhm.
What was that, 2016?
Okay, yeah.
A lot of different changes were coming down the pipeline. It was just a lot of real world things, but a lot of content for class. So we had some very real and mind bending conversations in my classes that I'll never forget, especially in my capstone classes, because of literally what was going on, not even talking about the textbook, but just about what was going on. I actually remember the day that we went to class. I think it was the day after the election, and just the open dialogue that we had, and the many different variations of perspectives that were in the room, and how we were able to navigate those conversations with our social work hats on. It was very interesting, and that's an experience that I'll never forget. But particularly with the University of South Carolina, I love the way that my professors then, and a lot of them are still there, they allowed us to just be us in
Mm,
class, and just navigate conversations in our authenticity. And then we talked about, like I said, like a lot of real world things. Their thing was like, yes, we'll dive into the textbook, but let's talk about real life for a second. So that was like my favorite thing about my program at the University of South Carolina.
That's awesome to hear. And that's something I found like I can relate with too, of how application-based social work is, not just to clients,
Mhm.
but also like to yourself as you're going through the program, because it's not
Yeah.
separate from real life. And like the things
Mm-mm.
that are happening in real life aren't separate from us. Like it affects us. And so,
Seriously, and I will never forget the type of conversations we had the day after the election. The conversations that we had were the way that things were impacting our field placements. A
mm,
lot of my classmates, they had field placements where they had Hispanic clients, and they just shared how right after the election, when they went to field, half of their clients were gone, and they never showed up, and they weren't answering any phone
wow.
calls. And so it was just, I'll never forget the conversations that we had, because it was so real for
Mhm.
students to like see that firsthand. It's the difference between it being in a textbook versus you actually talking about it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's such a big testament to how really big macro things impact people on such
Mhm.
individual levels for like lasting change.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. What advice would you give a prospective social work student or someone who's just starting their programs to help them
Yeah.
succeed or do well?
Mhm. So my advice is always to be open-minded when it comes to social work. Like I said, when I came in, I just knew I wanted to work at a hospital. I didn't work at a hospital until like what 3, 4 years into my journey as a social worker. And then when I became a student, I was just very focused on school social work. I have yet to work. I have yet to be a school social worker, even though I was so invested in it. So my my recommendation is for students or prospective social workers is always to have an open mind. Of course, you can know exactly what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But just have an open mind of how you want to accomplish it, even if you do know exactly what you want to do. Because with social work, and you'll learn this quickly, it doesn't look the same in every state. So even if you know exactly what you want to do in social work, that's cool. Still write it down and look at your options, because the way that you go about reaching the goal that you have may be different in this state versus that state. So then you got to look at, okay, where will I live? What does school social work look like in Connecticut
Yeah.
versus Illinois, you know? So that's like one big piece of advice that I give all students, is to be open-minded. Even if you have a goal, still do your research. A lot of the things that I learned about social work, I learned after I graduated. Would have saved me a lot of time if I learned it before. So definitely do your research on the field. It's so much to learn about social work, especially the differences in the states. Each state has different licensing requirements. The job markets are different. Even within, like, for example, South Carolina, the job market in upstate is very different than the PD area in my state. So, just do your research in the exact location you want to live, or the prospective cities that you want to live. Do your research on the job markets, what they like to look for, because every placement's different, every location is different, every state is different. It's just so varying when it comes to social work. So, just do your research and be open to the way that, you reach your goals in the field.
Yeah, I agree. And something that stuck out to me that you said was how so much you learn after you graduate too. Because I think lots of times people think of
Oh,
graduation
yes.
as the finish line, whereas really
Ugh.
like those first jobs, you learn
Ugh.
so much.
So much. And so at my school at USC, they drilled in us that you're a lifelong learner, you're a lifelong learner. I still say those words to this day, because now I know it to be true. You really are a lifelong learner when you sign up to be a social worker, because things are always changing. Like we talked about before, macro changes directly impact people on a micro level. And
Mhm.
so the exact field you're working in can change in like the blink of an eye, from something as small but mighty as a presidential election. So the field is always changing. And so you have to be open-minded again, but you have to be a lifelong learner and just like willing to adapt and change as things change, and just willing to learn more, because like I said, things are always changing in the field. People change, so
Mhm.
you have to keep up with that as you serve people. So yeah, definitely lifelong learner.
Definitely.
So
What
like
did your journey look like post grad? So you graduated. I know you've had a couple different social work roles. What have those been and where are you at now?
Yeah, so after I graduated, I went straight into work. I think I had like 2 weeks off before I went to work. I went to work at Department of Social Services.
Oh, wow.
So I worked for Intensive Foster Care and Clinical Services Department. And it was foster care, but it was the more intensive and therapeutic side of things. And so I was a case manager. I did that for about 6 or 7 months. And then I transitioned into school-based therapy with the Department of Mental Health. That was fun. And then that is when I pivoted and did medical social work in the ER. So when I first signed on to the job, I was a psychiatric social worker. And then right before COVID, they merged our roles into being medical and psych. So we were just we were just case managers, social work case managers in general, doing all of the things in the ER.
Wow.
Um, into here. So now I am a library social worker. I also did a hospice social work part-time for a bit. And
Mhm.
that was a that was a learning experience. But now I am in a library. My official title is Library Resource Associate.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's what I do now.
That's awesome. And what does like broadly a day-to-day look like when you're in the library?
Yeah, so with my role, I like to preface this by saying that all library social workers do something different depending on their community. So for my community that I work in, a big need for the community was resources, like knowing what's out there, how to get access to services, all of those things. So that is my focus, is resources and referrals. So I work one-on-one with any library patron that comes into the library. So some of them walk in, some of them call for an appointment, but they are looking for resources. Really depends on what the situation is. But the common things that I get is needing assistance with either Medicaid or knowing their options or being screened to see if they're eligible for Medicaid. And then food and shelter. Those are my three biggest resource needs in our area. But I pretty much can give resources for really anything related to health and social needs. And so that's what I do on a one-on-one level. And then on the flip side, I do a little bit of mezzo, sprinkle a
Mhm.
little mezzo in there. I coordinate and facilitate community events here at the library that meet the needs of the entire community. So for example, and they're all related to health and social needs. So for example, I've done pop-up vaccine clinics, COVID vaccine clinics. I think that we have a provider coming this week that's doing pop-up HIV testing. And so it's things like that, financial health classes, self-care classes for adults. Mental health first aid has become a big part of my job in teaching classes here at the library and getting the community certified in mental health first aid to bridge that gap in services. So one side of my job is one-on-one, meeting with people, helping them navigate resources. And then the other side is partnering with other agencies to bring in library programming that meet the health and social needs of the entire community.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
a
been fun.
big example of navigating barriers and yeah, connecting people to
Yes.
what is available. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Um,
Yeah, I was really lucky with this position. They pretty much allowed me to make it whatever I want to make it into. So I pretty much like just looked at the community health needs assessment for the county, see what the biggest needs were as far as like resources, and then I built from there. So this was like a really great experience leadership wise, and then program design. I've never had that that experience before. So
yeah,
this was my first time doing program design. So it's been fun.
a lifelong learner.
You
Always trying out new things.
see what I'm saying?
That's awesome. And then the flip side, the more entrepreneurship side, will you speak a little bit
Yeah.
on Black Girls in Social Work and what that is, how it came to be?
Yes. Yeah, so Black Girls in Social Work is a networking organization for Black women that are either professionals already in social work or they are in school for social work. So this came about because I felt community in school, but that changed very quickly when I graduated. When
Mm,
I graduated, all of my social work buddies, they were spaced out everywhere. They moved on. They moved to different areas. And of course, like the connection to your professors aren't the same.
mhm,
And so I felt a lack of community, a lack of support in trying to find my way in social work. So when I started at the Department of Social Services, it was great learning experience. It just wasn't for me. And I knew that I wanted to do something different. I just didn't know how to go about it. And
mhm.
so I just did not feel that I had the community that I needed. And as I sought community with other social workers, with my previous classmates, all of us that had no idea what we were doing or where to go from where we were all Black women. And so I found that to be very interesting And then, I mean, I thought about it, but I didn't think too much into it. What made me think a lot into it was I began seeking out resources for finances, because, social services, I wasn't getting paid a lot. And so I wanted to learn more about budgeting, things like that. So I joined an online community, just trying to learn better ways to make money in additional streams and budget. And a lot of the women in the group were social workers posting and saying, I'm just not able to thrive off of the income that I have, trying to figure out a better way to navigate the field. And they were all Black women. And I'm just like, what is going on? So I created a Facebook group, didn't think much of it. I just wanted a big old group chat for us all to talk, like, what's going on? Like, how can we help each other? What's the disconnect here? And it turned into way more than I thought it would be. I really didn't have any expectations creating it, but the need was there. And so even now, as time goes on, we discover more needs for Black women in social work, and we really truly try to create what we need within our community. And so, especially with our upcoming conference during COVID, I experienced a serious need for a space and an opportunity to really experience self-care in the most realist form. I feel like we talk about self-care a lot on the surface level, especially within our social work programs,
Yeah.
and especially with students. I do feel that sometimes we do students a disservice without really talking about self-care, like really talking about it, and not just, call a friend, and, really talking about what it means and what it can look like. And that's how our conference came about. I really felt that during COVID, and I've been experienced that I was not fully prepared with social work when it came to self-care. But I really felt that in COVID, and I really saw a lot of not even just Black women in social work, but a lot of social workers struggle with that. But particularly with our community, we had a lot of people in our Facebook group posting about wanting to leave the field because of the burnout they were experiencing. And so that's how we came about with our conference. And so a big thing that we do is we try to find a solution for all of the problems for our community. And so it's been a journey. It's been a journey. I'm really excited about what we have going on right now, and what we have coming up. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so cool to hear how passionate you are and that you saw the lack, felt the lack, and then other people also felt that. So now being able to hold hands and, pull each other up whenever
yeah,
someone does need help or does need support or does need to know how to take care of themselves better, because I feel that too, that it's so different doing self-care of like, oh, I'm going to take a quick bubble bath, but then all of my problems are still there, versus like, oh, I'm being really mean to myself up here and I need to fix that to take care of myself or set boundaries.
Right. And that's a good example of how, like, I feel that with social work programs, they don't talk about the different avenues of self-care, because there's financial self-care, there's physical self-care, there's mental. And so when I was in school, we never dived into the different aspects of self-care. We just had a conversation, make sure you're taking care of yourself. How will you take care of yourself? And then we will make a list of, I will go to the movies, I'll call a friend. And it's just like, once you get into the field, it's just like, wait, this is this list is not helpful at all.
Like, I'm crying at the movie now. What's happening? Like,
I couldn't even get to the movie because I have borderline symptoms of depression right now, so I can't even make it. So it's just like, okay, what do I do when that happens? Or like the signs of burnout. I don't think I knew what burnout truly meant until maybe 2 years into the field, what it really truly meant.
And
how to look out for it, what it feels like, what it looks like, how to look out for it, what to do when you're aware, like, oh, this is burnout. Like my first therapist had to tell me, this is burnout. And I'm like, oh,
Right. And it's so
no.
crazy because we're trained to help clients and to look out for them and look at the signs and everything. But then it's so
Mhm.
different when you put a mirror up to yourself and you're like, oh, I have to
Yeah,
do some more work myself, like whether that's with
right,
community or finding
right.
resources, whatever it may be. So it's awesome that
Mhm.
you have created such a big resource that, like I said, I'm sure has impacted the lives of so many social workers, which is
Thank you.
incredible to see both sides of the profession, like how you're doing
Mhm.
both of them. That's so
Yeah.
awesome. One last question, I guess, just who has inspired you throughout your journey?
Oh, who has inspired me? That is a good question. Who's inspired me the most is my family.
Mm,
Um, and I say that because I didn't have, well, to some people, if you see my history on paper and where I come from on paper, you say that I had like a stereotypical upbringing
mm,
as a young Black girl. Um, and so especially when I meet a lot of the clients that I meet here at my job, I see my uncle, I see my cousin. And so growing up, experiencing a lot of the things that I experienced, experiencing a lack of a lot of things. Um, Now when I'm in the field, I see my family. Don't even know why I'm getting choked up about that, but I see my family sometimes. I see some of my family members in my clients, and me having a desire to help people really came from being a helper in my family.
mm,
Because I'm an eldest daughter, so helping was just my assignment from birth. You know how it is when it comes to older daughters and eldest childs, like we're the helper of the family. And
mhm,
so I was the eldest daughter. I'm the eldest daughter. I'm the eldest granddaughter. And so helping was just, that was just my thing growing up. And so I learned compassion and empathy at a very early age. And
mhm,
so to come into a field where those are the main skills in your toolkit,
mhm,
and then coming across clients that like remind you of that uncle and that cousin is just, I don't know. I'm just coming to the realization that my family really does um like keep me going in the
mhm.
field because it's kind of like that what if they had a me type of thing.
Yeah, the being the
So yeah.
person you wish was around. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks for
So
sharing. Yeah, that is big.
yeah.
And it's so important, like how we were talking about burnout, self-care, and everything, to have that purpose that can keep you
Hmm.
going because it does get tough. But then also having, that motivation of being a person who you wish was around when you were younger or who you
Hmm.
wish the people you loved had around is something that can ultimately be so fulfilling.
Yeah, yeah. And it definitely it makes it all worth it knowing that it's one thing to feel like, I'm making a difference because of the data from, all of the clients that but when you really think about like, no, I've been there where that client was. I've been there before. I've seen it before. And what I just did for them really would have helped years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
so having that type of measurement of success, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you for
that
sharing all
question.
about your journey and what you're up to. If people want
Um,
to stay connected with you or find you on social media or anything, where can they find you?
Yes, so on Instagram, it's at a Black girl in social work. I think that's my name on Instagram and on
Mm,
Facebook. But if you can't find me by that on Facebook, it's definitely Bodequia Simon, my first and my last name. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much taking the time. It's so great to hear
Yeah.
about your journey and what you're up to.
Thank you.